Welcome to the Quarantimes. I'm your host Reema Gupta, and my goal through this series of videocast is to bring you the voices of women from different walks of life. I'm connecting with entrepreneurs, NGO leaders, women professionals, healthcare workers, educationists, and women from the unorganized sector to understand their perspective on the lockdown situation and the challenges and opportunities it presents for them. Today with me, I have Ekta Verma, who works with Samvad Advocacy and is founder of the initiative called Invisible Scars. Her organization deals with a very difficult but very important topic of domestic violence. Violence against women is a violation of women's human rights and a major public health issue. So welcome Ekta to the show. Could you tell us a little bit more about your organization, what it does?
Hi Reema, thank you so much for doing this. I work with an organization called Samvad Advocacy, which is an NGO. Under this NGO, we have founded Invisible Scars, which is a support group for individuals facing domestic violence. We help women, we help men, and we help the transgender people as well. However, at this point of time during the corona crisis, our focus is largely on helping women. Invisible Scars has been modeled on a support group, and this has come out like if you've heard of something known as a medical support group, you would know that people of similar conditions, for example, cervical cancer, if there is a support group for cervical cancer, people suffering from cervical cancer from all over the world can be part of that support group, and they share best practices, they share information with each other and things like that. And that is the kind of space we have tried to enable for Invisible Scars as well, where everyone who's facing or who has someone who's facing domestic abuse, or even if you don't, you in general can understand. So we've created this safe space where people can talk, share best practices, reach out to each other in times of difficulty or to help other people. And as the name suggests, it's called Invisible Scars. The reason that I started this support group was because domestic violence is a very, very lonely journey for the victim. All throughout the journey, it's very lonely. Even though people know about it and they help you with it, it's still a very lonely journey. And so we wanted to create a safe space where everyone can not feel so lonely when they are going through this, or, can talk to people without being judged.
Sure. No, it's great to know that there is such a thing, and there's a big support group. I totally agree on the value of it. And actually, it was interesting while doing some research. I thought it's more prevalent in developing countries, but when I looked at the data, it was amazing that the global numbers are equally alarming. And according to the WHO study, it talks about domestic violence. Almost 30% of women at some point in time face domestic violence, which is described as either physical or sexual violence against a woman by an intimate partner. And when I looked at the range, it of course says that, in developed countries or richer countries, maybe it's around 24% versus in some of the other countries, Asian and Middle Eastern, it's around 37%. So huge domestic violence. I mean, that literally translates into 1 in every 3. And one of the alarming, again, statistics and news reports I was hearing in the media is that, especially in this case of lockdown, right, where women are with these partners and they are in confined spaces, there's a huge concern about, and people are seeing the calls have increased, emergency calls with respect to violence, domestic violence cases. So could you give a little bit about what you are hearing? Is that true? What is the international perspective on domestic violence, and especially in this lockdown situation?
Right. So Reema, very, very interesting question. Now, the thing is that we are talking about reported cases. So all the statistics you have quoted are of reported cases. You do need to understand that there are so many cases that do not get reported. Also, one thing which is a little different in India versus Western countries is Western countries focus a lot on intimate partner violence, like you said. However, in India, we have very complicated family dynamics. So the abuse could be through any domestic relationship. I will give you an example of this. A couple of days back, I got a call from someone who was being beaten by her mother-in-law. So it wasn't even the husband, and the choice for the husband, of course, very difficult choice to choose between, supporting his mother, supporting his wife. And so it's very complicated in India. Having said that, what Google has found out is that during this lockdown period, from the time the lockdown started, the searches for the word domestic violence have gone up 75%.
Wow.
Which is a massive number.
Sure.
If we look at a country like South Africa, which I'm sorry.
Sorry, that's a global number.
Sorry?
The 75% increase is global domestic violence.
Yes. In search for the term domestic violence, in a country like South Africa, there have been, in the first week alone, 90,000 cases of cases being reported. So these are cases being reported. In European countries, almost double of what was being reported. So the global numbers are massive. The problem is huge. Europe has pumped, France in fact has done quite a few things which are good and helpful for the victim. One of them being pumping in an extra budget of $1.1 million. Then what they have done is they have subsidized hotel rooms. About 20,000 nights of hotel rooms have been subsidized. So if someone is facing domestic violence, they can immediately move out, seek help, stay at a hotel, because that's the first problem you face if you're in a situation of crisis. One of the other things that France has done, which is very good, is they allow for reporting in grocery stores. Now the thought process, they use something which is called a code word, and it's COVID-19 or mask 19, I think. Sorry, not COVID-19, mask 19. And so you can go to a grocery store. If you use the term mask 19, the person knows that you're reporting domestic violence, which means that the system is now moving closer to the victim rather than the victim having to go closer to the system. So that's one of the things. And of course, by pumping in more budget, they have managed to open pop-up counseling centers. So these are very necessary. We have so many people in India who are educated, who are working. It would be so nice if a lot of volunteers could come forward, start taking calls. It's so much easier when people pitch in together, and I think those are best practices. So I wanted to kind of start off with highlighting what's happening in the world.
No, that's great. And maybe just to build on this a little bit more, to dig a little deeper, is what do you feel is the cause? Why has lockdown suddenly increased the number of domestic violence, right, cases? What is it driving? Because if we understand the root cause, maybe we could mitigate it a little bit. Is it that, are there certain trigger points that are getting triggered? Or is it the close proximity that this person had the propensity to be violent, but maybe because now of the closer proximity, there is more chances of, more probability of having the incidences? What do you feel is driving this huge amount of domestic violence cases?
So according to me, it is the fact that you are now stuck with your abuser 24/7. When there was no lockdown, if it's a working woman, she goes out to work. Of course, the man goes out to work. You don't see each other for a long time. He's traveling, you are traveling sometimes. So the amount of time that you spend with each other is way lesser than the amount of time you're being forced to spend with each other in a closed area. The privacy of your home gives the abuser more power to abuse, because most women so far, who've not reported domestic abuse and have kept quiet around it, give their husbands more liberty or their in-laws more liberty, or whoever's abusing them, it could be parents also, to abuse, because they have not reported or taken action before. So that fear that we will be reported, or this information would go out and other people would know, doesn't exist. So silence actually makes abuse worse. Silence is the abuser's biggest weapon, is what we say. So it could be a combination of multiple things: being with your partner for a very long time, very very high stress levels within homes, of course where there's financial difficulties it is even higher. Then again, not reporting and being silent and facing the abuse the way it's being meted out, all of these things in combination add for towards this situation, making it worse.
Okay, so maybe let's bring it to India now, an Indian perspective, and maybe you could tell us what have you seen, given that you are directly counseling and supporting this group. Have you seen an increase in domestic violence? Is there a certain segment that you see more of this? What is the situation right now in India?
Okay, I primarily deal with urban women, working women. The people that I come across are mostly those who are educated in good families, decent families, middle, upper middle class women. What I have seen is that a lot of distress calls are coming in. So what we do as a group is, at invisible scars we don't counsel. So what we do is we have tied up with a lot of organizations that provide counseling services. We work very closely with the police. When there is a case of physical violence which is going out of hand, we immediately recommend that the victim dials 100, 1090, 1091, 181. There are multiple helplines, and so if you're someone who uses social media, these days there are multiple messages floating around on social media that say that these are helpline numbers, and if it is physical violence, we do not want to take a risk, and hence advise the person immediately to seek help from legal authorities, because at this point of time they are the only ones who can physically reach out to a victim. That's the first thing. Then of course, where there is emotional or psychological or verbal abuse, mental abuse, then immediately again we ask people to reach out to counselors, speak to counselors. We also tell, especially in cases of emotional and psychological abuse, we tell victims to disengage. So we send them information on how is it you can disengage with your abuser, because what happens is the whole abuse happens when you engage, and it's a very vicious cycle, and they know how to abuse you, they know exactly where to hit you, where it'll hurt. So we try and tell them to disengage till things get better. Again, if it is very abusive or very emotionally violent also, we suggest that they reach out to a helpline or the police. The police is very actively helping, the women's commissions are helping very very actively. Everyone is recognizing that this is a problem and there is a lot of help. You just need to reach out.
So one thing that you had mentioned, like when we had talked about international cases and some of the things that France is doing, right? I really like the idea of a code word, right? Because a lot of times when even woman is trying to reach out and she's on the phone, it's very hard for her to communicate if the abuser is right in the same area. And so is there something similar from Indian perspective that you could tell our viewers what they should do if that's such a situation?
There is nothing standard, but these days we are seeing messages floating around where they say you put a red dot on your hand, and if you show the red dot to someone, they will understand that you're going through abuse. But that is only possible if you are out of the house or if you have access to other people. In this lockdown situation, the worst thing is that you don't have access to other people. You're locked within your own homes. So in such cases, we say don't take a risk. Just dial 100, or keep multiple helplines on your phone. The minute you sense anything, just dial. The red dot idea is good. There was a black dot campaign that happened a few years back. The success of that campaign, it was not very high because very soon enough abusers started discovering that these black dots existed, and so then it didn't become. So I don't know how successful the red dot thing is, but yes, whatever works for you, whatever way you can use to communicate that you're being abused, just use that.
Sure. And maybe one of the things is that, we as individuals also, because we hear a lot about it, some of us and our viewers probably want to help. And the question is, as a bystander, as an individual, what can we do to help? One is, if we are witnessing something, how can we be part and be able to productively help? Because I'm sure there are some things that you don't want them to do. It will only anger the abuser. It will only have negative repercussions. So you want to be able to handle it very delicately, and would love to hear from you as to what things you've seen work very well in situations, and especially for bystanders. What can we do?
Right. So the first thing is, if you are witness to any kind of violence, the first thing would be, there was a Bell Bajao campaign. I don't know if you would remember it. So there was a violent incident happening in the neighborhood. The guy just goes and rings the bell. So that kind of intervening. So what abusers fear the most is public ridicule. Right, they want to abuse within their homes. These are fairly sophisticated, educated people who do not do the same, who don't repeat the same behavior at their workplace or in front of their friends, and so they fear ridicule. So when you go and intervene in this way, say you ring a doorbell or you call them out gently, in a very casual manner, they kind of understand that what's going on. So those are one of the first critical things you can do. If the disturbance doesn't stop despite this, you can, as a neighbor or a bystander, call 100. Just call 100. If you don't want your identity to be revealed, you can call them, you can request them to keep your identity a secret, and the police doesn't go and talk about your identity. They check on what is happening within that family. They talk to everyone. So it works by not keeping quiet. You just have to communicate. You could also, if you get an opportunity, of course it's very difficult, talk to the victim directly and see if the victim is willing to talk to you. So the only thing I would say, as bystanders or as people intervening, we could be friends, family members, neighbors, don't place any conditions on the help. The minute you say, I will do this for you, and you have to do this for yourself, it becomes a condition to the victim, which is not a good thing. So don't give any advice, because advice comes from my reality. I may have a completely different reality than the victim, and the victim, what I advise her may actually end up harming her more than benefiting her. So it is best to reach out to a professional, whether it is a counselor, whether it is a lawyer, or whether it is the police, on behalf of the victim.
No, that's very good advice. Thank you. Yeah, I remember the Bell campaign, and that was very, very successful. And I thought it was very effective in at least just intervening and maybe giving that little bit of a break to the family in that situation, right? And I think one thing that you really mentioned that I think is important is you not getting emotionally involved in the situation, and when you call the person out, just be casual and friendly, and just kind of giving them a message that but at the same time not putting them on a spot.
Right.
And I think thank you for those tips. I think they're very useful, and I hope our listeners also find them useful. I think the last thing I wanted to also check was the post, right? So the one thing is that we also hear about abuse of children, and sometimes the children get involved in the family. So is there something that you would suggest? Because generally the children might go to protect the mother, they're part of the right in the house, and what would you recommend, that how would we work with the children in that case? And also maybe a little bit more advice on post the session, post the trauma, how do you work with the victim to convince them? Because again, a lot of times the victim doesn't want to come out, right, and tell the story, and that's where a lot of the challenges. So what can you do as an individual to help the family out?
Correct. So there are two parts to this question. One is, what do you do when children are also a part of this domestic violence? And the second question is, how do you help a victim post incident. So the first thing that I would say is, if children are involved in any relationship, a lot of mothers, and I come across this, I think, almost every day, who say to me, oh, he's a very bad husband, but he's a very good father. And in our culture, of course, we are taught to respect elderly people irrespective of what they do. So what I think is very important for mothers to do, especially because you are in contact with the child all the time, is not to hide anything. See, don't hide. Your children understand. And when you hide things from them, either they are unable to support you when you need it the most, or they themselves grow up thinking it is normal to be in an abusive household. I will give an example of this. So I know a victim who's raising two daughters and is in a very, very abusive relationship. Now, one of the daughters does not know what it is like to live in a family that doesn't have abuse. So when you talk to her, she thinks, oh, maybe this is just how all families are. So the mother has never really spoken to them about abuse and how it makes her feel. So I feel that if you have slightly older children, you should not hide your situation. You should speak to them. You should empower them with knowledge to protect themselves, because abuse is not restricted. If someone's getting beaten, the chances of the other person getting intervening and getting beaten is also there. It's a very complicated situation. So first thing is, don't lie. Second is, if there is a very small child involved, there is the child helpline you can call immediately. If you dial 100 also and you tell the police that there's a small child in the picture, or there's a child in the picture and the child is also being subject to this kind of abuse, the police takes immediate action. However, we should not allow children to be in toxic environments. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if we realize that we are unable to move out of a toxic relationship, then we should talk to our children, make sure that they seek counseling, make sure that they get the required help, and understand that this kind of an environment is not okay to be in.
No, I think very, very important point. And I've seen some research also that says that I think what you made is making children aware and not hiding from them the reality is very important, because generally the boys, if they see their mother being abused, they also feel that it's normal. And, that is the way how you work with women or the wife. And sadly, they also become abusers of their wives. So it's very, very important to communicate with the children that, yes, I'm in this situation, but this is not the right situation. And, to make them aware of the moral consequences and at least empower them to make the right decisions moving forward. I think very, very important point that you brought up. Thank you for bringing this point. And the other one was just that post the trauma, right? How do you work with the family and with the situation?
So depending upon whether the person has reported or not, there are two different sets of actions we do. So if someone is not willing to go forward and report their abuser, we suggest counseling to them. Now, the purpose or the objective of counseling is to lead them to be able to think themselves. For example, there are so many women who don't know that it's not okay to be devalued in a relationship, and they don't think that their happiness or they are important in a relationship. Hence, they just keep facing abuse because they don't know better. And we hope that they don't feel good about things, they crib about it, probably talk to their friends about it and then forget about it. However, we want them to understand, and it is not for me to advise. Like I said, I never advise because everyone's reality is different. We send them to counselors, and the counselor then counsels them, trying to bring them to a point where they understand, okay, this is what I am facing and this is what I can do about it. But primarily, the decision of whatever has to be done with the survivor's life has to come from the survivor, unless and until the survivor is not capable of taking that decision. In cases where they are not capable, a guardian or a parent will take that decision. But in cases where they are, it is important to let them take that decision, because ultimately it makes them feel empowered about their lives, and how they then restart their lives once again is based on how they've left or in cases if they've not left, there are cases where couples have gone for counseling, and the husband or the in-law has eventually understood that okay, this was abuse and I shouldn't be doing this, and things have worked out better. Very rare, but there have been incidences. But mostly, we ask victims to seek counseling, because that's the only way that you can work through a toxic environment or a toxic life.
So, Ekta, one last thing before we go. I'm sure we have many survivors among us who have gone through this journey. Is there a specific message or tips you have for them?
Yes. Great question, Rima. Thank you so much for asking that. So I'll just give a few tips for people who are in distressful situations. I don't like calling them victims. Survivors is a more appropriate term. So the first, and these are very small everyday things that we can do. So the first thing that we can do if we are in a distressful situation is shout. Shout, scream, call for help. That's the first thing. The second thing you need to do is keep your phone charged and keep your phone with balance at all times. Don't land yourself in a situation where you don't have enough balance to call up anyone or reach out to anyone. It's a very, very basic thing, but sometimes we are so much involved in the work that we are doing that we just forget about ourselves. Keep 3-4 different helpline numbers on your phone. If one doesn't work, try the other. If the other doesn't work, try the other. The minute you reach out to someone who's helping a domestic abuse or a violence victim, you don't have to worry. You will be connected to a series of people. So just reach out to somebody and say, I'm looking for help. That's one of the things. Then if you can, and if you have good friends and neighbors who live around you, keep an emergency bag. So try and keep your certificates, your bank passbooks, a couple of extra set of clothes, just a very small bag, not something very heavy, small light bag, but something which is an emergency bag. In case you need to get away immediately, you can grab it from the next door house. You don't even have to raise an alarm at home and then just kind of walk out. So that's one of the things. And of course, be smart. If you are in an abusive situation, take pictures, take videos. Don't keep those pictures and videos on your phone. Forward those pictures and videos to your trusted friends or family members, so that it remains on record, so that in case your phone is snatched away or your laptop is taken away, there is still a record of all of those things. And the last thing is create an alternate email ID, which is yours and yours alone, which nobody else has access to. Women share a lot of their passwords with their, I personally do it with my daughters, and everyone in the house kind of has access to my laptop. But then there should be an email ID or a social media ID which you have, which is solely yours and which nobody else knows about, so that if you are ever in a distressful situation, you can also log in, ask someone else to log in and reach out for help. So it's just about being smart in everything you do on a daily basis.
Those are wonderful tips. Thank you for sharing them. I think very, very important. And I think every one of us should potentially use it, whether a survivor or not. It's something, yes. I think these are all survival skills. So yes. I really appreciate those tips. I'm going to make my bag after our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rima.
This, and we wish and stay safe, stay healthy. We wish our viewers also a safe lockdown, and hopefully we come back to normal life and can connect with one another again.
Yes. Thank you, Rima. It was very nice sharing whatever information I could.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.